I know this video probably seems pretty late as the topic already seems to be disappearing from public conversation, not because it's not still relevant, and I do still think this is a relevant video to upload, but just because I think the people who have been impacted by this news in terms of how they feel about the game Gotham Knights have made their decision to either cancel their pre-order or just come to terms with it. I think that people who haven't really cared about the news here, again, it hasn't really changed their minds either. So the story behind this video in particular, when it was announced that Gotham Knights does not have a performance mode, meaning on day one you cannot run the game at 60 frames per second on your console, I had TeladiaPlays on my channel. He's a friend of mine. I will leave his information in the description below. Please be sure to go and subscribe to him as well. He's doing some awesome Gotham Knights coverage. But we recorded a video, he recorded it on his end and sent it over. I had some issues downloading it. It was an empty file that must have been corrupted or something. He sent it over again and I was able to retrieve it. But this time, while I could hear him super clearly in the video, my audio was cutting out really bad and glitching out really bad. Teladia made it clear that he's really proud of this video and really wants it to see the light of day. And so I've decided that the best way to go about that is to utilize his audio from the clip and re-record my thoughts regarding Gotham Knights. I'm not going to go back and pretend that I'm having a live conversation with him in this, even though I was at the time, since some of that audio is unusable. Instead, I'm just going to give you my live updated thoughts, and I'm going to play interspliced segments of his audio so that you can understand his thoughts as well. One thing I want to add before I get into this topic and play some of his clips is I just want to make it very clear that personally I am very sympathetic to people who are upset about the 60 frames per second performance mode not existing in Gotham Knights on consoles. I understand why it's really frustrating, and I'm going to get into how I kind of came to that realization, despite personally being really excited for the game still and still planning on playing it day one. I'm really not overly impacted by this decision. As usually, I prefer playing games in fidelity mode anyway. 60 frames per second is a nice cherry on top if it's there, but usually I prefer the 4K ray-traced version of the game over the 60 frames per second, but I understand that's not the case for everyone, or potentially even most people. I also understand that many games in the last 2 years have had a 60 frames per second performance mode, and it has really made a big difference to gamers, and so regressing from that can definitely be frustrating. The way that I'm relating this is essentially I'm trying to imagine how I would feel if they'd instead come out and said, this game does not run in 4K. In fact, it doesn't even run in 1080p. It runs at 720p. So kind of what you expected out of a resolution of an Xbox 360 or PS3 game. Now, in that scenario, I would still play the game for the story and the gameplay, but I would be kind of livid, to be honest with you, because I really like seeing the full resolution of my 4K TV in use, and that would make me pretty dang pissed if that was not an option. So I do feel that I can sympathize with people who are upset about this decision. I do just want to say, please do not send Teladia any hate. He is pretty blunt in this video about disagreeing with people who are overly upset about there not being a performance mode in the game. He feels that it is kind of a whiny and entitled move to cancel pre-orders over, as he just doesn't see it as a deal breaker or a big deal at all. And to be fair, I do think he represents a pretty large margin of gamers as well. When polls have been done regarding the 60 frames per second issue in Gotham Knights, it does seem to only be between 10 to 20% of players that actually seem to care much or to really notice a difference. And so it is very much a vocal minority, but that is a complaint and a frustration that I think is absolutely worth voicing. But again, I think Teladia represents the other side of that, of people who don't even understand what the problem is. So I think it's a nuanced situation. And again, I just ask that you listen respectfully, that you don't send hate to Teladia over his opinion on it. And I just invite you to make your own decision about Gotham Knights. If you want to play it, if it speaks to you, I'm so happy. It's doing that to me. It's making me want to play it. I cannot wait for Friday. It can't get here soon enough. But if you're frustrated, if the marketing has not really swayed you to want to play the game, I think waiting for a sale is absolutely justified. If the 60 frames per second not existing in the game is freaking you out about the performance, yeah, maybe cancel your pre-order, wait for reviews, wait to see how it runs in streams, and then pick it up. So I'm absolutely not blaming anyone for how they feel about the game. But anyway, I'm going to let Teladia pick it up from here for a bit, and then I'll interject with some thoughts here and there.
Okay, so guys, I'm your boy TeladiaPlays, and me personally, I'm not cancelling the pre-order just because it's locked at 30 frames per second. I mean, Avengers, right? When that came out originally, it was last gen and this gen, that was locked at 30 frames per second day one, and I remember that. and a lot of people were not happy about that. But they hid it away from us. Not Gotham Knights. Ghost of Tsushima was locked at 30. Spider-Man PS4 was locked at 30 FPS. So there's various games there that have been locked at 30. But for me personally, for people to go out their way and say, look, I'm gonna cancel my pre-order because it's not at 60 FPS, it's kind of childish and bickerish. We all know that you're still gonna play the game regardless. Like, it's a DC game. And for fun fact, right? You guys wanted a Bat Family game, you get a Bat Family game, and they say, oh well, they should take out the co-op feature. The co-op feature of that game is the core element of the game, and that takes away the experience and everything for people to play, play with friends, or let's say because they're gonna do that 4-player co-op thing too, which is the Heroic Assault. So there's that as well. So it's like where people don't seem to understand is that the devs had to be reasonable, and they tried last gen, it just didn't work out on last gen, so they focused their energy on this gen, and they give us the best experience possible.
I do think Teladia brings up an interesting point here, in the sense that this is actually what the developers have cited as the reason that they haven't been able to optimize Gotham Knights for 60 frame per second gameplay on consoles. And it is that the other features that exist in the game simply require too much refresh data, things that require the 30 frames per second, that require that double time to really get the amount of things that are happening on screen at any given time. You look at the untethered co-op, which allows 2 players to simultaneously be in Gotham doing anything at any given time. The textures are all high quality, the models are all high quality. It's a big city, and I do understand the notion that, well, Spider-Man PS4 had a bigger city and arguably better graphics, and that had a 60 frames per second mode. But again, I think that it's hard and a little bit naive to try and guess what is going on behind the scenes of any given game. Games are made so differently between studios. There's a lot of things that are similar and a lot of things that are the same, but in terms of optimization especially, I think that there can be significant differences. And in terms of different gameplay loops and models and systems and engines, there's just so many different components behind every single game that's out there that I think it's a little bit naive to just compare it to something else. I do think it's a apples to oranges comparison, and I do think that unfortunately when you make a game, you have to make certain sacrifices to make other features work. And as someone who has been on the side of a game developer, I've worked with the Unreal Engine multiple times on multiple different projects. It is something where a lot of times games really do feel like miracles when they come together. A lot of systems seem to barely be working and barely hanging on by a code of threads. So I do understand that it's not always possible to simply check a box that says run the game in 60 frames per second on consoles. There would need to be some significant time to delay it, and there are people clamoring for the game to get another delay so that they can get the 60 frame per second optimization on consoles. I am not really in that camp. I've waited on this game for 8 years. Let's just get it. If they end up putting in a performance mode patch down the road, if that's possible, great, but that isn't a high enough priority for me to ever want to tell them to delay the game any longer. I'm really excited to play it. Again, I understand why if this is a deal breaker for you, I can understand why that would be a priority as well. Then just push the game out later so you can get that here. But I think, unfortunately, when game developers have to pick and choose which features they're going to include in a game, they have to cut other ones. And there are so many amazing features between different games at this point that you're not going to satisfy every player. I also think that Slickmoth in his video yesterday actually, did a great job breaking down so many things that go down behind the scenes that we don't know about. You know, for all we know, Warner Brothers, some of the higher-ups could have cut funding on that feature of the game, or they could have set a deadline and they ran out of time to include that feature in the game, or maybe the game was being built for, cross-generation play, and so it was a game that was originally going to be playable on PS4 and Xbox One, and so they didn't necessarily consider 60 frames per second as being a priority, because when you're starting development on this game in 2017, maybe they weren't optimizing it then for 60 frames per second, and at this point, you'd have to kind of restart the project in order to get that kind of fidelity in the frames per second. Ultimately, there's so many moving pieces, and I do think it's hard to try and predict what's going on behind the scenes, or to assume that we know what the fix is when we didn't work on the game and have no way to see the code.
And also to bring this up, it's like we know that the PC port is literally 10. I think they have got 60 frames and 1080p, but that's at lower settings. But you gotta remember that they've changed the specs for the PC port as well, and many people are just like saying, "Oh well, now I have to get it for PC." I guarantee you're probably gonna need a 2080 or a 3080 to be able to run this at high end. So like for me personally, as someone that is literally playing it on next gen, I'm not only just playing Gotham Knights, you see, I'm also expecting bigger games also, like coming in next year, like Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman and so on and so forth. And plus there's going to be DLC for this stuff for Gotham Knights. I'm just like, it's not a big, deal breaker for me. It's like, would I love to have it at 60? Yes. Would it matter for me if it's stuck at 30? No. Like, it doesn't bother me that it's stuck at 30, because a lot of people don't realize is that if they take the core element out of the game, you're basically broken your game. You're gonna have a whole cyberpunk situation. Do you remember what happened with Cyberpunk 2077 when that launched? And it's like, what's the word I'm looking for? Even though there's backlash, I know majority, like some PC guys will just say, like, hey, you know what, I told you so. I'm just like, that's you guys doing it. I'm still gonna play it. Like, as a DC fan, we've been waiting 7+ long years for a DC open world game, and now's the time. Now we're getting a DC open world game, and you're backlashing at it, and you're like, oh well, I'm not gonna play it. You didn't complain you did complain when Arkham Knight came out, but you didn't complain after that. You were like, oh well, it was locked at 30, and when we upscaled it to 60, you guys didn't complain there. And when Gotham Knight showed its preview to content creators and stuff, and they literally they did say to the developers, by the way, that developers did say to the content creators that the fact that this game that they were playing on was on console, they weren't even playing on PC, and people were saying, oh, they're playing on PC when they weren't. The only thing I'll just say is, guys, is that don't let this 30 frames per second, say to you, be down by it. There is still a lot stuff to come in terms of content, in terms of stuff that the game will deliver. So don't be just put down by it. One teeny little thing. So I'll say that.
I think the ultimate way that I can frame my perspective around the whole Gotham Knights situation is I respect the hell out of these game developers. I respect the hell out of pretty much any game developer. It is a hard job, and especially when you're working with AAA games, there are so many cogs in the machine. There are so many developers trying to create a cohesive experience that can be played by one or two people sometimes, that feels, again, very individualized to that player. And again, there are just so many features in games now, and so many things we've experienced, and games have progressed so much, especially in the last decade, that now we're reaching a point where I think there's too many features to accommodate a single game. And so we are now seeing some of those deviations from what we personally would like to see. Gotham Knights, for example, has some RPG elements that don't necessarily speak to me. They're not game breakers, but for someone else, they might be what they are most excited to play through in the game. And I want to keep a positive outlook on this experience. Again, I'll reference Slickmoff's video again. I think he did a great job of breaking down that if you're excited for Gotham Knights, you shouldn't necessarily let the frames per second deter you. If it's a great story, it's still going to be a great story in 30 frames per second. With that being said, I also think that it is fair to consider that there are people out here who were really excited for this game because it looked like it offered something different. And to be excited for this game and to assume that it's going to have a feature like performance mode, and then rather than having them months ago tell us that that wouldn't be the case. Instead, to have people start asking and start hearing rumors that it wouldn't have that mode, and then to have the marketing team hop on Discord and have to confirm that that is not a feature in the game rather than making some big public announcement. I mean, it felt reminiscent of when they announced that the game would not be on PS4 and Xbox One, when they did it in like the form of a tweet. And there are people to this day, we're like days away from the game launching, who are just now finding out that they do not have a console to play this game on. So while I'm absolutely not holding any of the developers responsible, and again, as someone who is beyond hyped to experience the story and gameplay and open world of Gotham Knights, I do think it's a fair criticism to say that the way that the marketing team went about relaying this information did not feel the most transparent, and I can understand why people are frustrated by it. Similarly, I can understand why people are frustrated about a feature in games that they've come to really appreciate and love and potentially even depend on in terms of how they time their gameplay. That learning that this game doesn't have it, I can understand why some are choosing to cancel pre-orders, and I do think that Teladia has made an interesting point of highlighting the different types of people who are awaiting this game. Again, you know, the people who are looking at this for a gameplay experience, or maybe trying to dip their toes into the world of Gotham City, versus people like Teladia and myself, who are just diehard DC fans who were going to play this game no matter what it was. And then I do think that raises an interesting question. Are Teladia and I even the right people to be commenting on this, since we're not the ones really being impacted by it? I do think that our perspective is an important one and an interesting one to lend to the conversation, but I also understand that since we're not the ones having an issue with it or feeling that this is breaking the game for us, I understand how without having the other side of the argument here, our opinions may be coming off as rather tone-deaf here and not sympathetic to the situation. Again, I do feel I can empathize by imagining what it would feel like if the opposite were true, if 4K was not a feature that was going to be in Gotham Knights. That would frustrate and upset me, and when I apply that to the 60 frames per second, I can understand why people are canceling pre-orders and wanting to wait and see what the performance even looks like before they order the game, because if they say it's locked at 30 frames per second but then starts dipping down to like 20 frames per second, that could absolutely be a deal breaker. That could be a really frustrating gameplay experience. But ultimately, I am really excited to check this game out. I've been waiting on this game for a long time. I'm a huge fan of the developers and their previous work. I'm going to play it day one. I think it looks great. I know a lot of other people who are in my camp, but I also don't think anyone who isn't in that camp should be feeling any shame. I do think that there has been some slips in judgment in terms of the marketing of this game. I do think that there are some features that this game lacks in order to accommodate other features, and that's just going to come down to a very personal taste in terms of if they hit the right checkboxes for you. For me, they did. For you, they might not have, and that's okay. Hopefully another game that's coming out this year, whether it be Hogwarts Legacy or God of War Ragnarok or Modern Warfare, really does give you the gameplay experience that you are looking for. But those are my thoughts. I want to thank Teladia again so much for coming on, and I just want to say please be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. Please be sure to leave in the comments below your thoughts on the 60 frames per second situation, and feel free to subscribe to Teladia if you would like to get more of his content as well. His information is in the description below, and we will see you guys in the next one.